For the past few days, I've been digging into something I haven't revisited in a long time. Spongebob Squarepants, the Bikini Bottom Outbreak. You might be more familiar calling it the Spongebob Infection AU. It's a long-running comic-style story created by ICPs on TikTok and Instagram. And if you've read it, you already know it leaves a lot of questions behind. Details that look small at first suddenly matter later in the plot. Pieces of character cards show up out of order. Some rules seem to shift, others don't. The more you read, the more it feels like the story is trying to show you something the characters themselves never fully understand. Almost like the big explanation is there, just buried under the chaos. So I went back. I reread everything, all 28 chapters, in order, and started lining up every clue that the story gives us. And finally, I found something really, really interesting, because I actually might have just solved this outbreak and revealed Plankton's true plan. The story opens on what looks like an ordinary day at the Krusty Krab. Fred sits down to eat a Krabby Patty. We can also see his status card here, showing his state of hunger, thirst, sanity, and his belongings. Meanwhile, SpongeBob and Squidward are talking about how the place feels strangely empty. Things have felt a little less miserable, as Squidward says. And in the back office, Mr. Krabs is already in bad shape, but at this point of the story, we don't know why. Things fall apart fast in the next chapter, once Fred's eye suddenly pops out while he's running. Now his status has become infected, and he's marked as Stage 1 infection. Hungry, unstable, and looks agitated. And before SpongeBob and Squidward even know what's happening, we learn Krabs became infected earlier than anyone else. He's already turned into a breathing corpse that only speaks gibberish. He's the real patient zero here. We also learned that Plankton is already dead by this point in the story. It was said that Plankton couldn't realize that his own invention would inevitably also become his death. Remember this, it's a detail that becomes important later. Karen's card also shows up here, saying she's immune to the infection since she's, well, a robot. SpongeBob and Squidward immediately run to the chum bucket for shelter since they learned that the infection was already all over the news. She asks them if they saw Plankton at the Krusty Krab, but they didn't. Karen is the first one to piece together that something made by Plankton is spreading across Bikini Bottom, but she doesn't know how yet. All she knows is that Plankton was working on something, but he never told her the full plan. Too bad, Karen. I don't think Plankton can come home anymore. The two of them didn't stay for long since they decide they should search for Patrick and Gary. Out on the streets, things get worse quickly. Civilians start turning, Mrs. Puff gets bitten by Fred, my leg, Rashid, and we get a flashback to the day before the outbreak where Krabs shows off a new batch of patties he bought from a cheap supplier. This is already strange. Krabby Patties are always made in-house, so the fact that these were ordered from outside is the first real clue that something is very wrong. Unfortunately, Krabs did eat the new patties earlier that day for breakfast, and he turned into a living corpse in less than a day. SpongeBob quickly figures things out. He tells Squidward Fred and Mr. Krabs got sick right after eating the new batch of patties, but Squidward doesn't want to think about it now. On the other hand, Pearl is shown getting jumped by the freshly turned Mrs. Puff. As the infection spreads, more pieces start falling into place. Plankton's worm project is explained. He modified parasitic worms with the intention of taking over people's minds so they would obey his commands. 4 infection stages are introduced, each one more destructive than the last. What's scary is that in the first stage itself, the infection could already pop out your eyes and make your body rot, with the final 4th stage stopping your heart, taking out both eyes, and losing both your arms and legs, or as people like to call it, the pickle stage. SpongeBob finds Patrick next, and sure enough, he somehow slept through the entire outbreak. This is also where they had their first bloody encounter with the infected. Patrick instantly jumped and bashed in the infected skull with his hand hammer, but there's more coming their way, so they run off to Goo Lagoon. On the other side of town, Pearl actually survives an infected Mrs. Puff ambush, because she somehow brought a knife with her. Just realizing the condition, Pearl's crying for her dad's help, so she makes a run for the Krusty Krab to look for safety. We all know this won't end happily for Pearl. Karen finally manages to find some notes on Plankton's infected Krabby Patties experiment. It was revealed that he's the one making the cheap patties and then selling them to Krusty Krab. But he also added that Just in case anything goes wrong, I've made an antidote since I wouldn't want to kill anybody. But he didn't specify the cure. Things get chaotic fast once they reach Goo Lagoon. There aren't any infected around at first, but it doesn't stay peaceful for long. A whole horde charges at them, forcing SpongeBob, Squidward, and Patrick into their first real fight. Squidward actually snaps first here and starts thrusting his clarinet, showing how desperate he is. They're cornered and out of options by the time infected Larry shows up, looking like a final boss fight. And just when it looks like they're finished, Sandy drops in and takes out Larry with a karate kick. Apparently her diving suit gives her some serious protection. The infected can't pierce the suit easily, so Sandy becomes the group's strongest fighter by default. But her suit is far from perfect, and we start to see bites denting her armor. Meanwhile, Pearl finds the remains of her father. He's already at stage 4, which means the worms have left his body. She also met Gary there and brought him to the chum bucket, where Karen is slowly turning the restaurant into a safe house. Stress is building, more and more infected show up, and yet people are still not taking it seriously. Perch Perkins even goes out to report the situation on the streets without any protection. Patrick becomes the next big problem. Since he's in a constant state of hunger, he's been secretly eating patties, not knowing the risk. Later that night, he turns, attacks Squidward, and manages to bite off his right arm before they can stop him. Sandy quickly pulls apart Squidward's hands to prevent the infection from spreading further. Sandy's helmet also cracks in the process. 2 weeks have passed and the streets are heavily infested with the infected. One massive kraken is sitting on top of Sandy's tree dome, meaning she can't go back to repair her helmet or create any powerful weapons. More people take shelter in the chum bucket, and some are desperate enough to eat infected meat. Pearl is now basically Sandy's personal assistant in researching this infection. That line from Karen, though, absolutely heart-wrenching and ironic at the same time. Back with the main group, the three of them are hiding under Patrick's rock. It makes sense, since technically, it is the most reinforced home on Conch Street. But SpongeBob still can't help worrying about Gary. He asks the group every day if they can search for Gary again, but of course, Squidward and Sandy refuse. 11 days earlier, a day after Patrick got infected, SpongeBob brought up a story from the previous night to Squidward. He said Patrick looked like he recognized him with one stare and then walked away. He adds, maybe everyone infected isn't as mindless as they thought. But of course, Squidward is just disgusted by the idea itself. He insisted that the zombie wasn't Patrick anymore, and thanks to him, he lost an arm. This 14th chapter also gives us a few character cards. Mrs. Puff, Larry, and Patrick are shown to be still alive despite all the damage they've taken. What's also interesting is that both Mrs. Puff and Larry are still in stage 1 of their infection after 4 days. I guess since their infection rate is slow, unlike Krabs and Fred who reach stage 3 and 4 in less than a day. This means there are some factors affecting their infection rate, but we don't know what yet. Back at Chum Bucket, Karen and Pearl manage to trap Mrs. Puff. By studying her infected body, Karen discovers that the worms aren't dangerous outside of a person's body, they're only harmful once they get inside of you. In the next chapter, we see Old Man Jenkins having a short, heartwarming conversation with his grandkid. The kid said he found edible kelp jerky, which is rare considering the situation they're in. Back on Conch Street, SpongeBob made up his mind to not wait for Squidward and Sandy to search for Gary. Equipped with a pistol, SpongeBob goes outside again and meets infected Harold. SpongeBob tries to talk with him, but he's forced to shoot Harold when he gets attacked. By now, SpongeBob is starting to feel really guilty about killing the innocent infected. Sad news then came from the Chum Bucket. The infected Mrs. Puff hasn't survived and died in custody. Karen admits it was her fault for not feeding her, but decides to just push forward by dissecting her remains. The chapter opens with Jenkins and his grandson already infected at stage 1, and it turns out the jerky itself carries the infection. This is one of the biggest clues that the outbreak is not limited to Krabby Patties, or bites from another infected. Back in the lab, Karen dissects Mrs. Puff and finds something strange. The worms destroyed almost everything except the brain. This becomes one of the most important contradictions in the entire AU. Pearl finds Plankton's files under Gary's bed, which immediately makes her suspicious. She thinks Gary's hiding something from her and Karen. Karen reads through the files and finds a log of Plankton's notes. the reverse of the effects is easy. Simply feed the parasite some chum, and the effects are reversed. We're not told how or why, we just know Plankton considered chum to be the key. The story jumps to 1 month after the outbreak. Karen manages to lure Patrick in and feed him some chum. Now Patrick is undergoing treatment for a level 2 infection. He becomes docile, not perfectly cured, but stable. On the other side of town, Spongebob, Squidward, and Sandy regroup and call themselves the Dreamers, trying to fight back against the outbreak. Though I have to say, each of those three dreamt different things entirely. Sandy's now wearing her green karate gloves, ready to fight the infected. Squidward's arms have been replaced by steel blade tentacles for fighting purposes, ready to get his revenge. And for Spongebob, he's not sure about getting rid of the infected like this, at least for now. Still, it's better than trying to find Gary alone. The trio goes through town, clearing infected. Squidward gets dangerously into it. He's destroying the blood way too much. But Spongebob still refuses to let go of his guilt. Spongebob posts missing Gary flyers everywhere. Squidward points out that almost no one alive will see them, but Spongebob insists maybe Gary will. They're startled by a random fish who jumps out of the shadows. Squidward panics and kills him instantly, only to realize he wasn't infected. This becomes another breaking point for Squidward. Back at the chum bucket, Patrick is recovering further, bandaged and talking normally again, but we still don't know what happens to the worms inside him. Sandy's suit takes more damage each day. The trio returns to Goo Lagoon for another clearing mission, and in the middle of the fight, Spongebob hesitates, loses focus, and lets Larry attack Sandy from behind. He smashes her helmet completely in a single strike. Without oxygen, Sandy can't survive. She begs Squidward to finish it quickly, and Squidward obliges. It's truly one of the darkest moments in the entire AU. Spongebob breaks down while Squidward tries to comfort him, but you can see he's hollowed out too. Squidward is exhausted. His robot arm is wearing down, plus his ankle is injured. Spongebob is physically fine, but mentally collapsing. At one point he says, "It's all about the meaning, Squidward," but it's clear that he is barely holding everything together. Meanwhile, at the chum bucket, Karen logs that the cure works, but not completely. Cured people act strange, refuse to talk about what they went through, and are eating huge amounts of chum. And at this rate, they are running out of chum fast. The Flying Dutchman appears, complaining that he can't find recruits because too many fish are missing limbs. Even he admits he can't reverse the parasite. Another chapter started with Spongebob dreaming of Sandy and Patrick catching jellyfish with him, but they soon fade away. His sanity drops even lower. Things are getting worse at the chum bucket. The cured eat through the remaining chum like pigs. In the middle of it, Karen asks Pearl, "Do you know what chum is made of?" That line truly sends chills down my spine. Right in the next chapter, Karen gives the refugees extra chum, and suddenly, the supply problem disappears. The chum bucket residents are full and content. Back under the rock, Squidward tries to lift Spongebob's spirits. We see their updated stats. Squidward felt weaker by the day and was holding on to his medications. Spongebob's sanity is almost gone now. He can barely speak. On the other hand, Karen and Pearl begin selecting expendable survivors, elderly, weak, or alone, and killing them to make more chum. Pearl hates every second of it, but Karen insists it's for the greater good. Gary gets his own status card here, which gives another layer to this mystery. He knows the truth right after reading Plankton's cure notes. He thinks the chum bucket is doomed right from the start, so he leaves. In Chapter 23, right after clearing Krusty Krab from the infected, Spongebob and Squidward finally reunite with Gary, the happiest moment SpongeBob's had in a long time. Unfortunately for those at Chum Bucket, Patrick and the Doctor fight over their portions of chum. Patrick accidentally bites the Doctor, but when Pearl scolded him about it, Patrick said he didn't mean to and then continued crying. 1 month and 3 weeks into the outbreak, things are eerily quiet. Lots of those who got infected have died. The Dreamers sleep peacefully for the first time in ages. Gary wonders if anyone else in town is sleeping as peacefully as SpongeBob, or if the rest of Bikini Bottom is suffering in silence. We see the fates of various characters. Squilliam fled to Rock Bottom right from the first day. King Neptune abandoned his duty. His daughter Mindy stayed to help survivors. Some people, like Bubble Bass, gone from starvation in his own basement. Even our senile heroes, Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy, tried to fight and got infected in the end. SpongeBob's parents are alive but starving in their home. Meanwhile, Grandma Squarepants is still missing after searching for her grandson. Soon after, Gary keeps leading the group to Chum Bucket. It looks like he knows something, and they're right. They find wounded Patrick outside the Chum Bucket. SpongeBob immediately wants to bring him home, and even though Patrick hisses, he insists Patrick won't hurt them. Squidward disagrees for safety reasons, but SpongeBob wins. The chum is basically useless now. More and more people are feeling anxious, especially after noticing more and more people leaving the Chum Bucket. Their last medical hopes, the doctor, has also turned. To make things worse, this time Pearl confesses she let Patrick eat from the trash and then leave. Luckily, one of the big revelation moments came from Squidward. After killing yet another infected, he notices there's chum inside them. A huge clue. The infection and the cure are mixing. Squidward is suspicious. He realizes the infected might all be coming from the Chum Bucket. In Chapter 27, Karen keeps doubling down on the greater good. SpongeBob is acting more confident now that Patrick is back. Even though Patrick still can't enjoy normal food, he's only enjoying chum. Inside, Tom catches Karen in Pearl's operation, but Pearl hits him with a bat before he can escape. The survivor wakes up tied to a chair. Pearl now fully commits to this act for the greater good. She kills Tom without a second thought. It's just brutal. At the same time, Squidward finally convinces SpongeBob and Patrick that something is wrong with the Chum Bucket. Too many infected are carrying chum. They're about to check it out when a woman bursts out of the restaurant screaming, "The lady at the Chum Bucket is killing people for the cure!" And that's where the story halts. Just 28 chapters of chaos and lots of clues. Now, after we've walked through the entire timeline, the tragedy is clear. We know who turned first, how fast the infection spread, and how everyone responded to it. But this is also the part where the story quietly becomes messy. Plot-wise, we never fully understand what we're actually dealing with. And weirdly enough, if you line up every clue from all 28 chapters, some details in this Outbreak story don't match each other at all. But let me tell you, these inconsistencies aren't mistakes at all. They're hints from ICPs. So all we need to do is lay out every strange detail that the story never explains. Because when you put all these side by side, the answer pretty much reveals itself. First things first, Karen said the worms never touch the brain. But one of the very first things the victims lose is their consciousness. Their minds practically go after they lose their first eye. Why is that? Then we have the cure from Plankton's note. He said fresh chum will reverse the infection. Rotten chum only makes it worse, and normal food does nothing to the infected. These modified parasitic worms clearly behave like picky eaters. What's with all the chum exclusivity? Why aren't the cures some sort of antidotes or antibiotics? And the infection itself is supposed to be through food, right? You should only get infected by eating the patties. Except, that's not what happens anymore. Fred infects Mrs. Puff by biting her. Patrick infects the doctor the same way. The worms are moving through saliva. It even gets stranger from here. The kelp jerky the kid finds also spreads the infection, even though that jerky isn't from Krusty Krab at all. As we can see, both Old Man Jenkins and the kid don't have any bite marks in Chapter 15, so the contamination wasn't isolated, it was already out there without anyone noticing. And then there's Patrick's case. He's one of the few characters who turns, recovers a bit, and still stays dangerous. Cured people also refuse to talk about what happened to them. The infection never fully leaves. Something is still wrong there. Speaking of minds, Larry remembers everything in Stage 1. Why is that? Does it also confirm SpongeBob's suspicion that Patrick, too, remembers something when he first turned? That's why he's leaving without any further fights. Then we learn that in Stage 4, Mr. Krabs' heart is still beating for some time, even after the worms leave his body entirely. What makes them leave? If they're really eating their host so much that it starts to get rotten right away, why not eat everything till nothing's left? You see, on their own, these details seem confusing, but when you put them together and compare them with how parasitic worms behave in real life, the infection suddenly makes perfect sense. One of the biggest confusions in this story came because Plankton left vague notes separately. Even his wife is having trouble understanding them. The real clue we need isn't the fact that Plankton built a mind control worm that malfunctioned. It's that he created something much simpler, and it works too well. And once you understand what these worms were actually designed to do, everything will make sense. Most people read this AU assuming Plankton made some classic mind control worm. It's only natural since Plankton himself said so. Something that crawls into your brain, takes over your thoughts, and turns you into a loyal zombie soldier. Kind of like those helmets from the 2004 movie. But when you actually pay attention to what these worms do in the story, that idea falls apart immediately. The worms don't go near the brain. They don't improve coordination. They don't boost aggression on purpose. And they definitely don't create loyal soldiers. If anything, the first thing they do is kill him, so that already tells you the plan didn't work. What these worms really do is something way simpler than mind control. They eat. Constantly. Aggressively, and most importantly, uncontrollably. And when you look at all the symptoms through that lens, the body rotting, the non-stop hunger, the pain, the madness, even the craving for chum, every single thing lines up perfectly with one type of parasite. A heavily modified intestinal worm that survives by eating the host from the inside and pushes the host's body into panic mode so the host tries to eat more food for them. Something that's similar to tapeworms in real life, but jacked up by huge chunks of steroids. Once you see it in that way, every contradiction in the story suddenly makes sense. Why don't the worms attack the brain? Well, because real parasitic worms almost never do. The brain has nothing they want. No nutrients, no acids, nothing to digest. A parasite that destroys the brain basically kills its own home. But the stomach, or the bloodstream, organs, those keep the host alive long enough for the parasites to keep feeding. And in this AU, that's exactly what they do. They eat you from the inside out. Okay, but then why do infected characters lose their sanity first? I mean, because they're literally being eaten alive. Their bodies are panicking non-stop. The pain alone would be unbearable. Any animal under that kind of pain and hunger would stop thinking clearly. You would hallucinate too if something was chewing through your insides 24/7. So the madness we see isn't mind control. It's the host's brain trying to survive overwhelming pain. I think that also explains why most of them refuse to elaborate on the experience. It's just a traumatic experience. This also explains why the infection spreads through bites. Worm larvae can travel through blood and saliva. If an infected fish bites you, the worms just go straight into your wound. And then the next big question is, why does chum work at all? And this is where Plankton's actual mistake shows. I think Plankton's real plan is to modify the worms to respond to chum. So in theory, the infected host would crave chum, walk into the chum bucket, and boom, instant customer. That was the plan, but he never accounted for one thing. The worms get hungry faster than the host can feed them. So when they run out of food, they start eating the host's organs. That's what caused the decay in the first place. And chum? Chum doesn't kill the worms, it just buys time. That's why Patrick starts stabilizing the moment they shovel chum into him. The worms finally stop chewing him. Which brings us to another weird detail people notice. Different characters decay at different speeds. Krabs and Fred fall apart in less than a day, Mrs. Puff slowly, Larry barely at all, and Patrick manages to bounce in and out. That's just simple biology. Everyone's body is different. Larry is strong, he has high muscle mass, good blood flow, and his body simply holds out longer. Mrs. Puff is smaller and already stressed, so she collapses quicker. Patrick is right in the middle. He breaks, then stabilizes once he has a non-stop chum supply. And Krabs? He ate a ton of contaminated patties on an empty stomach. He basically loaded himself with worms in one sitting. No wonder he went down fast. And on top of that, we also have to consider how many worms each character was exposed to. 1 patty? 10 patties? A quick bite? A full bite? The dose makes a difference. Once you take all this into account, the entire outbreak starts being a very predictable chain reaction from one huge mistake. So now that the worms make sense, we can finally talk about the part nobody ever figures out on the first read. What Plankton was actually trying to do. because Plankton was never trying to build an army. He wasn't even aiming to hurt anybody. He was, very simply, trying to make people crave chum. That's the whole plan. He engineered a parasite that lives in the stomach, detects chum, and rewards the host brain whenever they eat it. Eat chum, feel good. Eat more chum, feel even better. People will walk into the chum bucket automatically. It's still pretty messed up, but it's also very Plankton, a cheap shortcut to getting customers. But there's another fact that Plankton ironically forgot to account for despite going to college. He made them prefer chum, while chum is just minced or ground fresh fish, which means the worms were programmed to crave the exact thing Bikini Bottom residents are made of. So yes, the people started craving chum, but they also started craving each other. Once the host hasn't eaten chum in a while, the worm just thinks, hey, we ran out of chum. But you know what chum is made of? Our host. That's why every infected character is starving. That's why they look like they're rotting from the inside. Simply because the worms are screaming for food, and the host's brain is trying to satisfy whatever pain signal is killing them from the inside. Suddenly, Patrick's weird half-recovery isn't weird at all, huh? He only stabilizes because he has a fresh supply of chum. But he's still dangerous because the worms are still there, still multiplying, just fed well enough to not eat him alive. Same thing with the cured people at the chum bucket. As long as Karen keeps feeding them good chum, they don't lose their minds. And Karen? Oh boy, she figures that out way too late. She thinks chum's saving them, not realizing it's only delaying the inevitable. Half of it is Plankton's doing too, if you think about it. It's possible that the whole chum is the cure message Plankton leaves is for deceiving Karen. After all, Karen is known to sabotage Plankton's plan if anything goes out of hand, right? Plankton might have anticipated Karen's intervention once his plan worked, so when Karen tries to stop him by searching for the cure, she will only find chum is cure notes and proceed to help him sell more chum. It's a well thought out plan, truly, if only he didn't make any mistakes. And that brings us to the final piece nobody ever talks about. Stage 4. When Squidward starts noticing chum inside infected bodies, that's the moment the real horror of this story comes to the surface. Because in the AU, Stage 4 is described as the worms leave the body. But they don't leave because the host is healed. They leave because they've eaten everything they can reach. The host is barely alive. There's nothing left to consume. It's the end for the host, but not for the parasites. Once the worms exit, they're starving. They need to get to a new host fast. And they'll take whatever they can get. A nearby survivor, a pile of chum, or even worse, any source of food. And this is where everything suddenly clicks. The kelp jerky. Yes, I think the sole reason for the kelp jerky being able to spread the infection because it was just food that got exposed to worms that had already abandoned a stage 4 body. The kid found it, ate it, and started the cycle all over again. And suddenly, without changing a single thing from the original story, the whole outbreak becomes clear. Plankton didn't create a mind control parasite. He created a worm that rewards the host for eating chum and panics when it doesn't get enough. But he accidentally gave it a bottomless appetite, a taste for fresh fish, and multiple ways to spread, through bites, saliva, contaminated food, and eventually, anything left behind by a dying host. And everything that happens afterward, the madness, the cannibalism, the decaying bodies, the begging for chum, Patrick's partial recovery, Karen's desperation, all of it is just the natural fallout of that one mistake. The worms never mutated. They're just starving, exactly how parasites do. A completely predictable biological disaster, all because one guy wanted customers. And honestly, that's what makes this AU so interesting. The plot is so complex for SpongeBob standards, you might actually want this as an actual episode, but only if they leave out the gory stuff. Of course, all this could be wrong if ICPs ever comes back and simply says, nah, that's not what happens. But ICPs has never posted anything again since February of last year. So until then, I think this theory solves it. And at the end of the day, the Bikini Bottom Outbreak is a reminder of what happens when desperation, fear, and bad decisions pile on top of each other until everything breaks. Funny enough, this isn't the first time SpongeBob stories have hidden something deeper under the surface. Fans pick up on it before anyone else does, even when they don't know why. If you want to see another case where SpongeBob quietly tried to warn us about something important, check out my previous episode, SpongeBob Tried to Warn You About Adulthood. It's a different topic with the same idea. SpongeBob has always been sending messages we don't notice until we look back. I'll see you on the next dive.